Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're going to unpack a really fascinating reality that is completely reshaping our world, but honestly, it remains largely hidden from view. I mean, when you hear about the massive Chinese tech industry, your mind probably jumps straight to, towering skyscrapers, deeply complex algorithms, and this just unstoppable wave of state-sanctioned progress. It's almost always presented as this impenetrable monolith. But what about the actual human beings writing the code? What about their passions, their burnout, their everyday lives, and their quiet rebellions? Well, today we are shattering that black box. We're going to uncover the deeply human and often highly precarious reality behind China's staggering tech boom. So get ready, because what we're about to explore is going to fundamentally change how you view the global digital economy, the future of work, and the actual people sitting behind those screens.
Okay, let's dive right in. Think about how Western media typically tends to frame Chinese technological advancement. It's usually portrayed as this dark, threatening, almost Minority Report-style dystopia bathed in neon and shadows. Researchers actually have a specific name for this phenomenon. They call it techno-orientalism. It's this very specific lens that portrays Chinese tech as a massive robotic entity. It's hyperproductive, sure, but completely devoid of humanity. It essentially frames the entire industry as a terrifying black box, focusing almost exclusively on state surveillance and sweeping geopolitical threats. But the real problem with this framing? It's what it leaves out. It completely erases the actual people, the individuals with hopes and, frankly, exhausting schedules, who sit at those desks making these incredibly complex technologies function day in and day out.
And because of that highly stylized framing, we end up with a really profound disconnect in how we understand global innovation. On one side, you have the Western myth, right? This faceless, frictionless, state-directed machine operating with perfect robotic efficiency, just effortlessly churning out next-generation software. But the reality on the ground? It's strikingly different. The actual reality involves millions of human workers facing massive burnout. They're navigating an incredibly volatile and unpredictable job market, and here's the fascinating part. They're actively organizing quiet yet brilliant rebellions against the very systems they're building. To truly understand global tech today and where it's heading tomorrow, we absolutely have to look past the myth of the machine and focus squarely on the workers themselves.
Section 1. The Dystopian Black Box: Understanding State-Sanctioned Innovation.
Now, to understand the everyday tech worker, we first have to understand the environment they operate in. We need to look at the macro level of how the state actually architects these tech booms. And you can literally see this state-sanctioned architecture manifest in the physical world. Take the Zhangjiang High-Tech Park in Shanghai, for instance. If you look at the urban planning of this massive park, it's wild. All the north-south streets are named after modern Western scientists like Darwin and Newton. But then all the east-west streets are named after ancient Chinese inventors like Zhu Chengji. The state literally engineers these innovation zones right down to the street names. It creates this physical intersection where Western science blends seamlessly with ancient Chinese history. It is a highly curated environment designed specifically to attract foreign capital while at the same time asserting deep national pride.
But here's the catch. This curated environment creates a very specific dynamic called bounded innovation. Essentially, the Chinese government acts as a patron state. It pours massive, just staggering amounts of money, subsidies, and resources into these special economic zones to foster rapid growth and rival Silicon Valley. However, while they are heavily subsidizing the physical infrastructure, they are also tightly regulating the digital borders. Through mechanisms like the Great Firewall and very strict platform compliance rules, true unbridled creative expression is strictly bounded by the state's bottom line and regulatory needs. So what you end up with is an industry flooded with limitless capital and ambition, but operating within a surprisingly rigid and closed system. It's basically a golden cage of innovation.
Section 2. Inside the Big Factory: China's Tech Titans. Okay, let's zoom in a bit from that macro state level down to the corporate level, to the intense culture thriving inside China's top companies. What's really fascinating here is the vocabulary itself. In the West, we typically use the phrase big tech to describe industry giants, right? But in China, the colloquial term for these massive tech firms is dachang, which literally translates to big factory. Actually, think about the profound implication of that word for a second. We usually associate coding, app development, and UI design with sleek, modern, comfortable knowledge work. But by calling these companies big factories, it completely blurs the line between high-tech software development and grueling physical manufacturing. It strongly implies that today's software developers are essentially the new assembly line workers of the digital age.
And life inside that big factory? It is incredibly harsh. The reality of dacheng culture is defined by hyper-exploitation. The most infamous example, which you might have heard of, is the 996 schedule. This means employees are expected to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, often without any proper overtime pay. Add to that a cutthroat environment of extreme corporate poaching, where companies aggressively steal talent back and forth, forcing workers to literally constantly look over their shoulders. There is constant volatility in this ever-present threat of sudden, sweeping layoffs. It is an incredibly toxic work culture where human energy and creativity are rapidly and deliberately consumed just to fuel the launch of the next big digital platform.
Section 3. The Trap of Involution, the Micro-Level Struggle. So what does this intense environment actually do to a person? Let's zoom in even further to the micro level, to the emotional and psychological state of the individual tech worker trapped inside this machine. This brings us to a defining cultural buzzword in modern China, neizhuan, or involution. Now originally, this was an obscure, highly specific academic term, but has been widely adopted by millennials and Gen Z to describe this endless cycle of self-flagellation and extreme competition that leads absolutely nowhere. It is the overwhelming feeling of running frantically on a treadmill just to keep from falling off. Because the market is so incredibly saturated with highly educated, desperate workers, intense hard work no longer guarantees a promotion or upward mobility or even a better life. In this system, pushing yourself to the absolute limit really just guarantees sheer exhaustion.
There's this famous, almost absurd viral photo that perfectly encapsulates the sheer absurdity of involution. It's of a student at Tsinghua University, which is basically the MIT of China. The student is actually balancing a laptop to study and type out code while simultaneously riding a bicycle across campus. I mean, think about that. If the absolute smartest, most elite, and highly resourced students in the country are forced to desperately multitask like this just to survive the intense academic competition, what hope does an average worker have in the saturated job market? It is a visceral, almost shocking visualization of a system and a generation pushed to its absolute breaking point, where literally every single second must be monetized or optimized.
And that pervasive sense of hopelessness, it spurred another dark, yet highly poetic piece of slang, jukai, which translates to garlic chives. Now, garlic chives are a remarkably resilient plant that grows quickly and is very easy to repeatedly harvest right down to the root. Tech workers have actually started referring to themselves as jukai, symbolizing how they feel totally trapped in a massive economic machine that constantly consumes their youth, their energy, and their dreams entirely for someone else's immense profit. As soon as one crop of exhausted workers burns out and leaves the industry, they are essentially chopped down, and a fresh, eager batch of recent graduates sprouts up right behind them to take their place on the assembly line.
Section 4. Touching fish and pushing back. Everyday resistance.
But this brings us to a breaking point. Because, humans aren't unfeeling machines, and when pushed to the edge, they find highly creative ways to fight back against relentless systems. The ultimate irony of the Chinese tech boom is captured perfectly in a specific insight from our source material. The very people hired to build these oppressive, overarching digital systems like workplace surveillance apps, productivity trackers, or massive health code algorithms are the exact same people who possess the highly specialized technical knowledge required to exploit and subvert them. They are the brilliant architects of the cage, which means they are the only ones who know exactly where the weak bars are. And they are actively using that knowledge to launch brilliant forms of grassroots resistance. They use everyday tactics to reclaim their humanity. First, there is this widespread practice called touching fish. This essentially means looking busy while intentionally slacking off on company time, automating mundane tasks so you can browse the internet, subtly reclaiming your autonomy and your time right under the boss's nose. Then, there's the broader, more philosophical movement of lying flat. This is where young people completely reject the rat race altogether. They refuse to buy property, refuse to work overtime, and refuse to participate in the relentless consumer culture that demands their constant exhaustion. But perhaps the most fascinating is their incredible digital activism, specifically the 996 ICU movement. Developers used GitHub, a platform fundamentally immune to standard state censorship because it is absolutely vital for global coding collaboration, to publicly protest and crowdsource lists of companies enforcing illegal overtime hours. They took the very tools of their trade, the infrastructure of the tech world, to push back against the big factory.
Well, this brings us to a really vital question to end our explainer on. We've shattered the block box. We've seen the human faces, the severe burnout, the trap of involution, and the quiet, ingenious resistance of the Chinese tech worker. But as artificial intelligence advances and algorithm-driven gig work spreads across the planet, we really have to ask ourselves, does the plight of the Chinese tech worker mirror the future of all global digital labor? Are we all slowly heading toward our own version of the big factory?
It's a massive, critical question about our universal relationship with technology, and one I absolutely want you to keep in mind the next time you open a seamlessly smooth, hyper-efficient app on your phone. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.